So good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to join you again this Sabbath morning with Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. Welcome to everybody who is present here now and who will be watching us later on. We will start today with the responsive reading that is currently on the screen. So the yellow part, I will read the yellow part. When it is time, please unmute yourself and read the blue part, and then we will all together read the green part. For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our grateful song of praise.
For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth, and friends above, pleasures pure and undefiled, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our grateful song of praise.
For the gift of thy dear
Son,
for the hope
of
heaven at last, for the Spirit's victory won, for the crown when life is past. Lord of all, to thee we raise songs
of
gratitude and praise.
Amen.
Let's pray. Our Father, thank you for this gift of life and time and opportunity and wisdom and reason, so that we can meet together and learn together and praise you together. Please be with us and let us become better people through learning about you and the world around us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Today we have our own Bob Ford, who has very interesting presentation for us, and I'm sure we're all going to enjoy it. And without further ado, Bob, please go on.
Okay, I'm going to be sharing, and okay, can everyone see this okay?
Yes, we can.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Let me just talk briefly, introduce it. This is a picture of the Virgin River rushing past my property up here near Zion National Park. Actually just a few days ago. The presentation is based on one I did several years ago with Jim Walters in the Sabbath seminars. Now, I don't know how many of you online are living through the high smoke and temperatures and forest fires in Canada and in the eastern US and so on. But, you know, and if some of you want to explore this site, you'll see the link. I'd encourage you to look at some of the facts. I think Dave sent out a link to a document that talks about some of the science of climate change and so on that's going on the way it is. It's really quite amazing. I went online yesterday, and this is what I think this was either Chicago or New York, the smoke, the worst day ever recorded for air pollution there. And there's a map yesterday showing some of the fires and other things that are going on in the north. Now, I don't want to go into a lot of the science. We might do that more later. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change, and I've embedded links to various documents that we may look at a few of them toward the end, maybe in the second half. And some of these you may want to explore on your own elsewhere. Here, just so you'll know what it's about, on the left is a link to a very good video that talks about what's happening with the rising oceans and what's happening to people that live in places like Kiribati and so on. And on the right, there are links to documents about losses in global biodiversity, some of the other things that are happening in our world. This is one that also I encourage you to go to look at. Unfortunately, this is an article that you have to sign up for that's with the New York Times. If you get the New York Times, you could get this. But it talks about what are known as climate refugees. And of course, climate refugees, it's an interesting problem. If you look at the border crisis in our country and all that they talk about immigration, the scientists tell us that about a third of those who come from the southern parts of our country, South America, Central America, and even Africa, are really being pushed off because of climate issues. There are others, of course, that are pushed because of warfare and or needing jobs. But one of the real human rights problems of our day is that climate refugees are not recognized as a legal entity. And so it's hard to deal with this. But this is something that you could read about in this article. I'm going to say a little bit about my background, because then maybe you'll understand where I'm coming from. In some of my recent jobs, I've worked as a consultant in Africa and in Latin America. One of the more recent ones was working with a landscape program director in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, dealing with the protection of mountain gorillas. And I'll say a little bit more about that. Over the years, I've been involved with various kinds of assessments and work around environmental degradation and climate change. Just a few pictures just to give you a highlight. One of my consulting trips was with ADRA, in which we were dealing with refugees coming out of Mozambique into Malawi. And these were some of the refugees that I was working with. Center, another ADRA project in Ghana. ADRA at the time was doing really a very innovative reforestation project to deal with some of what's happening to the rainforests in Africa. Now, these are in this organization. I also worked both many years earlier and just a few years ago with the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund. And this happens to be on the right here, one of our veterinarians with a little Growers gorilla that we helped to rescue from poachers. It's one of my favorite pictures, this cute little animal. But I want to go back a little bit. Again, some of you may know my background, some may not. I hate to say it's almost 50 years ago. I went with funding from the State Department to study the famous Sahel drought in West Africa. Here you see on the left some of these are refugees from Mali that had come down to live in the fields near where I was working, and they were living in this little shack. On the right, that's my son. My son is now 50 years old, and he's a lot younger in this picture, and he's looking down into this shallow well where these nomadic herders I was working with were trying to get enough water to keep their animals without dying of thirst. So it was really, in later years, I did my PhD focusing on that drought and climate change in West Africa. Over the years, I'll talk about some of the other things that I've done. On the left here is a graduate student of years ago who's now one of the major professors of biology at Andrews University, Daniel Gonzalez. He and I and other students, including the picture in the middle, were working at protecting manatees and other endangered species in a wildlife refuge in the northern coast of Honduras. And actually in Honduras, this is very close to where I grew up as a child. So that's a long time ago. I won't say how long. On the right is one of the more recent pictures. Let me just go back here. One of my recent consulting jobs in the Congo, helping to train, and these are park managers in one of the largest parks in Africa, how to use GPS and to monitor poaching and other kinds of activities. In this slide, again, just a few things. So some of you may want to ask questions about some of these. And the reason I'm showing this is I think it relates to the theme of today, and maybe you'll understand where I'm coming from. On the left, there is part of a poster session I did a few years back dealing with landscape change in Rwanda, real close to where the mountain gorillas are. At the time, I was the first academic dean of our Adonis University in Rwanda in Central Africa. At the time, we only had 25 students. Today, the last time I visited the Adonis University of Central Africa, it has over 7,000 students. So it's been quite a pleasure to see that work grow. When I came back from Africa, studying the drought in the late 1970s, early 1980s, I was invited by the National Geographic Society to travel as part of a scientific team, the first one back into China after the Cultural Revolution. And some of you may have remember this famous picture from the National Geographic. And we traveled all on the famous Silk Road, was it 3,000 miles or so on railroad and airplane out to the deserts of Central Asia. It was really quite a great, really a great adventure, but also difficult. That was when I was working at Loma University. Eventually, I went to work here in Utah, where I live now. During the time I was in Utah, I got hired in 1999 to 2003 to go work for the State Department dealing with deforestation and climate change in Africa. It was first under the Clinton administration and then under the first Bush administration. It was a privilege to manage two projects. One of them I'm highlighting here, called My Community, Our Earth, that had funding from various agencies and private sector. It's called My Community, Our Earth. It was to help small communities and children learn about global change and how to be involved with this. And this, the patron saint, shall we say, of this project was Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who I got to actually brief several times. He became a very good friend, and I helped organize. If you want to go and listen to one of his more famous speeches, and this is at the famous Johannesburg World Summit for Sustainable Development back in the year 2000. So I was sitting just on the front row with him. I helped prepare his speech. And it was looking at, again, of issues of global responsibility toward the environment. It was quite controversial at the time. And if you want to ask questions about it later, we can talk about it. Now, I've put in the presentation just links to two other documentaries that I encourage you to go and find. Unfortunately, you have to sign up for these. But of course, David Attenborough is one of the heroes of my life. He's talked very recently in his 90s about what he's done in terms of studying the earth. I encourage you to go and look at this. As I mentioned, we worked in Rwanda 2 different times, dealing with the protection of the mountain gorillas. This is another famous documentary that I encourage you. But what I want to focus on today for our Sabbath discussion is about some of the philosophical, social, and economic theological issues around our ecological crisis. Now, there's a book that I encourage you, if you haven't read it, it's by James Hayward. He's an emeritus professor of biology at Andrews University, and he goes over many of the issues that deal with biology, with geology, many things. He, like I, like myself, are ecologists. And I think some of you may know the roots of the word ecology is really about the study of home, our home. And it's one of the most comprehensive of sciences that includes both human social dimensions as well as physical and biological dimensions. I'm not going to go into detail with this because I encourage you to go look at the book. Now, as he points out, maybe I just mentioned, it's a very interesting question. He said that everything starts with the sun. And he asked a question, and this may be one of the questions that we want to discuss. Why would a good God create a system with intelligent beings capable of contemplating the future, a future that will eventually become unsustainable? That's, of course, looking at what happens with stars and, and so on. There's some really big questions. That's on the planetary level, but also when we get down at the ecological level, there are many, many difficult questions. There are questions that deal around reproduction and death. Every ecosystem would not survive if there wasn't both reproduction and death, and recycling of the results of that. And of course, that raises questions about natural selection and the world's changing. And of course, we read in pain and suffering. We read in the story of Job about pain and suffering. And then the questions that comes up, well, why does God create a world? Or did he create a world with pain and suffering? How do we deal with that, particularly on that planetary level? So the science of ecology presents a lot of very difficult questions that, and we'll go into some of them today. We can continue the discussion next week as well. Now, for those who are Christians or are not Christians, one of the more important articles really of all time that was written that deals with this whole issue is by Professor Lynn White, back in in 1967, wrote a very famous article, The Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis. Now, you can go and follow the links and read more about it, but basically he is saying Christianity is the major cause of the ecological crisis. Now, is that true? Is that truly the case? Now, there's another hero of mine. I'm just going to, again, I'm not going to play these videos. We might have time later to go and listen to some of these. But this lady, Catherine Hayhoe, an evangelical Christian, her husband is a Methodist preacher, used to be at the co-director of the Climate Center at Texas Tech University. She is now the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. And she is a committed Christian that tries to integrate her work as a scientist, as a conservationist, with trying to also deal with the preservation of life on Earth. I really encourage you to go and listen to some of what she has to say. And either this week, if we have time, or next week, we may go back and listen to part of this video. Now, another one, just for, this is your homework assignment, everyone. There is a famous group that's based out of Lausanne, Switzerland. And I found out about this because my older son, the one that's 50 years old now that lives, he lives in Lausanne, Switzerland. He's a computer science professor. Well, there's a theological group there called the Lausanne Global Classroom. And they have produced a lot of very interesting videos and discussions around the concept of creation care. Now, creation care, shall we say, what is the duty of us as Christians relative to creation? Many churches have focused on that. One of the more interesting ones is what Pope Francis has done, and he had a whole special encyclical about that. And there's a pledge that he encourages his Catholic brethren to look at the whole issue of their responsibility toward nature and toward creatures and so on. I think I mentioned earlier, I worked in Honduras many years. I was actually born and raised in Honduras. My parents were missionaries there, and we'll talk more about this next week if we have time. But here's another link by one of the Catholic brethren from Honduras, talking about how he sees this encyclical relate to his life. Now, this prayer for our earth, and then maybe next week, if we're still on this topic, we might use this as a responsive reading. It really is a beautiful prayer that deals with the whole issue of our relationship with nature, with the poor, with the abandoned, with the forgotten, and of course, not just those humans, but the non-human world. And that's part of, I think, the challenge that we face. Now, this is where I'm going to get into where maybe our discussion. I just want to set the stage for you, and then I'll leave it up to McKinley and Simona to guide our discussion. A few years back, there was a book, and this was one that really was influential in my growth. It's called Earth Keeping, Christian Stewardship of Natural Resources. If you look at the picture, now the word keeping, and you might surmise, because I have this famous Aaronic blessing here, the Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord make his face to shine upon you. That idea of keeping the earth, stewardship, is something that they discussed at that time. And if you look at the picture in the cover of this book back then in 1980, you see this big electrical plant with the coal generating plants. And of course, that was how some Christians were starting to look at this. And there was a movement that developed among many different churches, relates to creation care. Now, as Seventh-day Adventists, of course, the Sabbath and Sabbath keeping is really central to our whole denomination, to our growth, and so on. So we may want to talk about that. You know, what is that blessing of the seventh day, particularly? And of course, and this is another issue that we could talk about, in Loma Linda particularly, there's many epidemiologists that studied Loma Linda, but other places like Okinawa, in Nepal, places where there are people that live long, productive lives, longer than the normal. And in the study of what's so-called blue zones, one of the key things that they identify, besides good eating, a diet, exercise, all the things, but is also having connections to family, to friends, to church, to your community, connectivity. And so, again, that's something that we as Christian Adventists see as something, an important contribution that we add to things. Now, just a few years ago, another book came out to follow up the earlier one about earth keeping. And this one says it's beyond stewardship. Okay, and if you look at the cover, instead of that electrical generating plant, coal burning plant, we're now looking at green fields of Iowa with, shall we say, wind turbines, creating more clean energy. And this book was really, I bought it recently and I have been reading it. And it goes through some very, very interesting questions. And I'm just going to highlight some of them. And I think this is where we might want to go back to have some of our discussion. If we have time, I could read the foreword. The foreword to it was written by Bill McKibben. Many of you may know about Bill McKibben, who's one of the leading environmental authors of our time. He established an organization called the 350.org, 350.org, which is an organization, a movement focused on helping people deal with their carbon footprint. This is something that McKinley knows about in terms of getting cars that are less polluting, but he talks not just about how we consume resources and what cars we drive, but he talks about our view of nature and religion, and he brings that into it. So it's this book has 12 authors, as I recall, 12 different, and I'm going to list some of the key things that I think we should discuss. And of course, we can't do all of them, and I'll leave it up to Simona and McKinley to maybe pick and choose some of the more important questions. But what are the most important things? And why do they call it beyond stewardship? Now, as Adventists, I think for many of us, when we hear the word stewardship, at least when I grew up in the Adventist church, it was about tithing. It was about our offerings, about your care of your family, of the church, of service. And that's all very important. But these writers, these are theologians from Calvin College and other theologians. They're saying, you know, it's about more than just that. Are we just overseers of nature? What does it mean to use the resources of the earth? What does it say about capitalism? Is it just an individual issue about how we live, how we consume, how we spend? Or is it also about collective issues? How do we work together as a community, as a church, but as a state, as a nation, or as a global community? There are issues. There was a very interesting chapter in here that talks about the relationship between racism and equal justice. It also talks about the differences between urban versus rural, natural versus unnatural environments, supposedly. Of course, I guess, and in Adventism, again, there's a long history of our being focused on, you know, getting out of the cities, getting to live a simple life in the country. Now, is that what we're supposed to do, or is that escapism? Some of those like to raise that as a question. There's a big word. Again, I wish Dave was here. He might be able to discuss it better on the theological roots. But dominionism, the idea of humans having dominion over nature. Now, is that really the correct attitude? Or should we rethink what is our place in nature? And the bottom line question is, why haven't Christians of all stripes, Catholic, evangelical, Adventist, why haven't we been more involved in dealing with these issues? Now, I live on a small farm, small ranch along the Virgin River, just out of Zion National Park. The last few years, I've been dealing with the drought, and we'll talk more about this. Of course, in California, there's been many years of drought as well. It's really a key issue. Now, the question I want to ask is this something that we as Christians, Adventist Christians, need to be more concerned with, more involved with? I'm just asking it rhetorically. Now, it just happened this last October, just a few months ago. some journalists from ABC News came out. They called me on the phone and they said, we want to come and visit your farm and we want to talk about the water crisis in the Western United States. So they came out and they followed me around for half a day while I was doing my irrigation. And after the break, or maybe before the break, if we have time, Simona is going to play this news clip. The article just came out a few months ago, actually 2 months ago, April 19. It was shown on the Today Show. It was shown on the David Muir News at night. And it raised some very interesting issues about our responsibility about water, focusing on the city of St. George and the county in which I live. And it actually had me involved in it as well. So you'll see that. So, and then there's another clip, maybe next week we will get to this, or you can do it on your own, which is from CBS News. This is an interview with one of the major managers of the Colorado River Water Project in Arizona, talking about some of the issues there. Now, of course, this last winter, and I'm showing you this last winter has been, the meteorologists tell us, a 1 in 1,000-year event in which out here in southern Utah and up in northern Utah, and I think in California, we've exceeded by several orders of magnitude the amount of water. In the top left, there's showing the snow on some of the roofs of the ski lodge up in northern Utah. Just on the mountain, about an hour from my house up in Bryan Head, Utah, they're still snowed in. They received 280% of normal snowfall this year. This has been causing a huge amount of runoff. And you can see this river here in the middle. It's running water wildly past my property. In fact, I had to turn my irrigation off for the first 3 times this year because there was so much mud and silt in the river. On the right, we're looking over my pasture up into Zion National Park. That's the I see out of my window. Now, in the bottom left, we see a picture of Glen Canyon Dam when it was down, when the water, over the last 2 months, the water has been rising a foot a day in Lake Powell because of the huge snow melt. And of course, there's a picture I took online a few days ago. They were actually the first time in many years able to run water over the dam down the Colorado River like it hadn't been done in years because there was so much water coming in. So, so here we have a water crisis. No, is it over? Of course, no, it's not really over. Is this something that we as Christians need to be involved with? What does it mean for us as Christians? It's not just how we behave individually, in our home, how we consume resources, how we spend our money, what food we eat, how we exercise. Those are all important things, part of the health message. But is our broader message about the health have something to say also about global health and these global issues? Now, Simona, I will let you, if you would like, I think we have enough time that you could play that one little video that deals with the water issues around St. George, and then we will take a break and then come to our discussion. Does that sound okay?
Yes, please. Can you please stop sharing your thank you.
I'll do that. Okay. Okay, so here we are now, and you're welcome to play that little video, and then we'll talk about it.
Wow, look at these seats, they're great. Yeah, kind of thought I had the aisle.
Sorry about this.
Popcorn, and savings. Just like bundling your home and car with Geico.
Apparently, we
Hot
have to
nuts are like
listen
home
about
insurance. I get it.
something
Gecko
else
explained
before we
it pretty
can go to our content.
Hey, I know you.
Yeah, hi.
Not you. The guy who helped me bundle my home and car. He's great.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it.
Probably thought you were somebody else.
Okay.
See how much you could save by bundling with Geico.
St. George, Utah is running out of water. The Virgin River, currently their primary source of water, is stricken with drought, as are many of the depleted reservoirs nearby. But as the fastest growing metro area in America,
basically our population is exploding.
and one of the largest consumers of water per capita in the United States,
We're using too much water.
St. George has to figure out how to conserve the water they have, or bring in more water before the town goes dry.
St. George is a beautiful area, but people need water to live.
I walk out to the outlet pipe for the water that feeds all of the little farms along this side of the south side of the river. Yeah, see, it should already be spilling over, and it's not. It's just really low. And what will happen when we hit the wall in terms of water? What happens then?
The issues with water are as old as the West.
Despite record snowfall providing much needed moisture during the winter of 2023, over the last 20 years, the Southwest has faced its worst drought in 1,200 years, according to UCLA, and St. George, Utah is no exception.
A community like St. George, it's particularly challenging.
Over the last decade, the population of Metro St. George has grown by more than 30%, according to the latest census data.
If, let's say, growth just stopped, my job would be really easy, because for our population right now, based off the water coming down the Virgin River, I know I can sustain that with no problem. When I start looking out a decade, I'm very nervous. We have an active plan to provide water for new construction for 8 years. But after 8 years, there starts to become a lot of question marks, because it is such a large concern to basically say in 8 years, there's a possibility we would be out of water. And then the next question was, okay, how can we fix this?
Seems like every time you drive down the road, there's a new construction project on the side of the road. We now have a reckoning here that there's simply not enough water to consume and use at the rates that we've been using. Bottom line is, there's going to be a significant curtailment required or ordered.
The St. George metro area has some of the cheapest water in the Southwest. When you include the millions of visitors to Zion National Park, the 14 golf courses, and an arid landscape, they are stressing the already depleted Virgin River.
I would say we've had about, on average, I'd say almost a 20% less runoff over the last 20 years.
We're right on the banks of the Virgin River. The river should be about a foot higher and running a lot faster than it is right now. My first hay crop here was 50 bales. I normally get 150 to 200. It's not a theoretical thing in terms of climate change or whatever. It's happening right in front of us.
Even with record growth and less water in the Virgin River, on a per capita per day basis, residents use 2.5 times as much water as Las Vegas. So now St. George is facing a decision: find more water or slow growth.
I know that they're working on conservation, which has got to be a piece moving forward, but they do need more water. It will stunt growth.
There's just less water in the system for everybody, and we're trying to adapt to that as quickly as we can. We need very large infrastructure projects to adapt to it.
In 2006, the Lake Powell pipeline was approved by the state to bring water to Washington County through a 138-mile pipeline. But 17 years on, the project is on hold, maybe permanently.
News on the Colorado River. The warning from federal authorities just today that we're at a tipping point, in their words, saying historic water cuts to multiple states are now possible.
Lake Powell is at 25% of its capacity. It's basically empty, and it's been drained over the last 20 years due to overuse of the Colorado River. If you were to withdraw another 82,000 acre feet for St. George for the pipeline, it would put even more strain on the reservoir system.
So this project's been under review by the state of Utah for almost 25 years now. And when it first started, there was no controversy behind it. Where the controversy really started was also when we kind of entered this really, really bad drought. So I think if Lake Powell was 80% full, it'd probably be under construction right now.
As the drought continues and the pipeline project remains on hold, St. George, a town used to abundant and inexpensive water, will have to learn to adapt.
We have to figure out how to use the water available for the amount of people. Hopefully they figure it out in time where it's a smooth transition so we can support more growth coming in.
Once in a while you'll hear some people that grumbles about growth, but our cities have all passed master plans and zoning laws that are encouraging a lot of growth. And those individuals continue to get elected.
So the good news is there's great potential for conservation and reduction. And it's not just some pie in the sky idea, because we know that other cities, Tucson, Las Vegas, have achieved this at a scale much greater than our population. And that's our vision, is that conservation is the answer, not piping in water from a lake that's quite diminished.
I would like to pass this property on to my family. I'd like it to go on to the next 2 or 3 generations. We're actually thinking, what are the options for us in the future? Will there be something here for my son and my grandsons? I don't know.
Well, thank you, everyone. Questions, discussion, and I leave it to Simona and McKinley. You want to? We could start with a few questions and then take our break, or you decide how we go ahead.
Well, I think we have about 15 minutes to start our discussion. What do you think, McKinley?
Yes, I think we should start the conversation around what Bob has presented, and then take the break at about 11:30 or so. So okay. If you're turning the Q&A over to me now, we can start that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you, Bob, for the presentation. And for the rest of our group, we invite your thoughts, your comments, your questions. I am deputizing for Monty today, and so I'll try to follow his practice of one, encouraging you to be brief and to the point in your question or comment. And if you can keep your question to 1 or 2, then we will have Bob give a response. To prompt you, there are a couple of things that Bob mentioned. One of them was in his very last comment before the video, which was, does the Adventist message of health, or could the Adventist message of health extend to the health of the ecology and environment? And then I sort of tied that question into Dr. Tongstad's presentation, relating the rereading of Revelation to a vision of healing. And then some of the other questions that Bob highlighted in the book by Bill McKibben. What does it mean to use the resources of the earth? what is humanity's place in nature, and should Christians be more involved in ecological issues? So those are some thoughts. Let's get your participation. Yes, Donna. Please unmute yourself.
Before we begin, and Bob, thank you so much. What a beautifully structured and thoughtful presentation. I just really enjoyed it. I wanted to say something though. For the first time in a long time, we actually made it to early church, and I sat next to someone whose name you would know, but whom I won't. This is separate. And she said, we like to go to the Roy Branson Sabbath School, but we are put off by the fact that there are very few live faces, just lots of black boxes with names in them. And so I thought we might think about that, because it is something I think that takes away just a little bit of the interactive feeling of a Sabbath school class. At least this person who we would really like to have in our Sabbath school made that complaint. And she, like I, had some very complimentary things to say about the class, but that was something that she missed, was seeing everybody. So,
and I mentioned that we followed that first church service here online, so we attended virtually this morning as well, and I was really appreciative of what Randy Roberts had to say about contentment, about whether you're poor or rich. What does it say about our relationship to resources, to wealth? I thought, it was almost as if he was reading my mind. I know what you have to say. And I said, well, thank you, Randy. You set me up this morning.
well, he did. He's always very, very good. And I enjoyed it. I was afraid he was talking about our marriage when he was talking about the bone and the soft spoken.
Yeah.
Hard, be a little more soft spoken, but once again, Bob, thank you so much. I always thought I'd like to move to St. George, but now maybe we shouldn't add to the burden over there.
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of derogatory things said about Californians coming to St. George. They're the largest number of immigrants coming in. From those that are no longer wanting to go to Phoenix, Arizona, they're coming our way. So the immigration rate is really quite phenomenal. A lot of people still think of St. George as this quiet little Mormon town. It's no longer a majority Mormon. It has grown quite dramatically. We have a very nice little Adventist church. So if you do come here, it's a wonderful little place. But these issues, and I should probably just in all in openness point out that I ran for county commissioner here in this county, focused specifically on water and growth issues. And actually, the gentleman that is now head of the Water Conservancy that you saw on the video, he's one of the men I ran against. He's a good friend. He and I actually, whenever we sparred politically, we talked about, he said, regardless of where you are politically, we need to approach these issues as citizens, as non-political, and as human beings, recognize that we have a responsibility. I'm not planning to do any more politicking. I think that's past my day, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Because there were those that told me, well, what's an Adventist doing running for county commissioner? I had several people that went after me for that, but that's where it is. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let me bring in Julie, but before Julie, you come in, let me just respond to Donna's feedback from sister at church. Thank you for the feedback. I invite all of us to think about that feedback, and to the extent that we are able to show our faces, let's consider that. I know that some people might have bandwidth issues with showing both the video and the audio. So we need to think about that as well. But thank you very much, Donna, for sharing that. Julie, please.
Good morning, everyone. So this has always seemed like a no-brainer for me as an Adventist, that we would take care of creation. And so, naive soul that I am, I started this sustainability group at Loma Linda. And, you know, it's been hard to get any traction. And I just wanted to get your feedback on how we can, you know, try to make headway, even if we get the response that makes us feel like, oh, you're just liberals and you should keep your politics out of this.
Yeah.
Not that it's said in those words, but I'm very interested in how we can do this. I mean, as Adventists, we're Sabbath keepers, and whenever we look at the fourth commandment, we're reminded of creation. And why wouldn't we want to take good care of what beautiful things God has given us? It just seems so obvious to me.
Oh, absolutely agree with you. I've had this discussion so many times, I can't count it. And just to give you a little, just recent feedback, last Sabbath, which, you know, our church had its, we had an outdoor potluck up near Cedar City. Some of you may know that. And the pastor spoke, and then we had Sabbath school class, and there was a retired pastor who's in our church who gave the Sabbath school lesson. And he went off on a big discussion. I'm not going to, again, mention names. He's a friend, but I think it kind of shows where many of our brethren are. And he had been listening to the news, and he had picked up on all the discussion about artificial intelligence. And I'm sure you're following that if you're follow the news about the dangers of that. And then he went and suggested that with artificial intelligence, they're going to combine with the Pope, and that will lead to the Sunday laws, and then that will lead to persecution of Adventists. And so I'm sure you've heard this before. And then, you know, we were sitting in this beautiful little park up in Cedar City, looking up at the mountain where the snow is melting and coming down, and they were having floods up in the city. And so I was, you know, I'm not picking on him, but I'm saying, you know, this is where many of our brethren are. I grew up with that view that that's what's happening. But maybe as we reread Revelation, as Tonstad said last week, maybe we really need to rediscover what it is to be healers. You know, and we can do this, I believe, in a non-political way, as a human way. And it's not just about humans, but it's about the non-humans. It's about the animals. It's about the how we treat our pets, is how we treat nature in broader speaking. So I'm trying to do my part. There are those that, like Julie, I'm sure that they would pick, there are those that would pick on me and say, you're way off on the extreme left. You're a nice guy, we like you, but you know, go and do your thing. But that's not the church's message. But I don't know. I think we can grow. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Bob. Julie, I wonder if we can build on your question with a slightly different way of putting it. First, why do you think that there is a reluctance from the people in the community there to think about sustainability more? And maybe then Bob can comment on that too.
Well, if you're asking for my response, I'll just tell you a little bit of my experience, and it's always about money, right? We don't have the funds for that, and it's a question of where our priorities are, what our values are, and part of the thing that we've asked for in the sustainability group is just a statement that these things are important to us. That's been difficult, and the funds to make things happen, to have more trees, to purchase the compressor or the compactor so that we can recycle, because we really don't. These things, we just don't have the funds for them. And so that's been part of the issue.
Now, can I just comment on that? I mentioned in my presentation that when I grew up in a missionary family. Whenever we talked about stewardship, it was all about tithing and offerings. And and even this morning, when I listened to the Loma Linda Church, there was a big call for offerings, about what we need to help the community and the church, and that the budget needs to be balanced, and that's all okay. But I agree with you, Julie, that when it comes to saying, well, should we be spending some of our money on some of these other issues? Now, the church does do things, and I would like to highlight what I said about ADRA. I consulted several years with ADRA, and ADRA is doing some really amazing things around the world. And most of the time, we don't hear about how they're doing things about conservation, about maternal and child health, or about dealing with gangs, and many of the things that people or humans are dealing with around the world. And of course, how we spend our money, whether it's a tithe or whether it's just an offering, I think says a lot about us. And I wish there were ways. And maybe this is something we have to do individually. Maybe it's small groups like yours. I don't know. I can remember a few years ago when the General Conference put out a statement about, this was after the World Summit on Sustainable Development. They put out a beautiful statement about Adventism and creation. And I would encourage you to go and find it. This was back when Robert Pearson was president. This was before our current General Conference president. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is progress. But I haven't heard much since. And I don't know. I'm just raising questions. I'm curious. Maybe, McKinley, I think this is something we can continue discussing about. What is that we can do? Is it just a personal thing? What can we do with institutions? Do we need to be more forceful? Do we need a new theology about nature? I don't know.
Thank you very much. Those are all very good questions. And Julie, thank you very much for sharing your experience there. I think your sharing tees up a number of things that we can talk about after the break, along the lines of the questions that Bob is raising too. But before we take the break, I also want to tie this to an observation that Ed Turner made a few or 3 or so Sabbaths ago. He observed that he had attended a church in his local community where the pastor presented a sermon that in his mind did not reflect any change from about 40 years or so when he had first heard the sermon presentations about the core Adventist messages. Simona shared the link to the PBS documentary about the Sabbath. I don't know how many of you watched that documentary, but we Adventist Christians take the experience and benefits of Sabbath for granted. For many others, the Sabbath experience is unknown. And I just wonder if there is a way along the lines of what can Adventists do differently to be responsive to these ecological needs. But I wonder if there is a way that we can extend the spiritual benefits and concepts of Sabbath rest to these bigger themes and incorporate that into our message that can perhaps motivate a different response than what Julie has been experiencing. So let's think about that, because if you really think about it, if major communities were to sort of take a Sabbath off, imagine people not having to go to the mall, all of the gasoline and diesel fuel that could be saved, and what the environmental implications from those savings might be. So something for us to think about. Simona, I'll turn it back over to you to call the break, and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. So let's take a break. It is now 11:33 on the West Coast. I propose that we come back at 11:45. It was about 12 minutes. And we'll continue then. Thank you. And we are back from our break. As it often happens, we have very interesting discussions and thought-provoking questions just when we stop recording, and perhaps even because we stop recording. So I would like to invite McKinley and Julie maybe to get back to some of the issues that they have raised during the break so that we can continue discussing some of these relevant issues. I'm giving you back over to you, McKinley. Oh, I see that Rodney is here. Okay. So it seems that McKinley is not yet ready. Let's take your question, Rodney, and then we'll go back to Julie.
Firstly, a thought about the breaks and how maybe in spirit and content they haven't been working or don't work very well. I think we build up a momentum, a high level of discussion in the topic, and we're humans and we don't like constraining ourselves by taking a break, and maybe if that break's a little too long. And so this keeps reoccurring. And I'm not offended by it, but in terms of being pragmatic and being a functionalist, it may be better to shorten the period to about 5 minutes. Other people can still take their break if they want to and turn their volume up. But it seems to me that the pattern here is that the need to speak, the wanting to speak, wanting to keep it going is overpowering our ability to be silent. And so that's something just maybe we can talk about and to think about. We might need to change our structure a little bit, but you're not going to stop people from talking.
Well, personally, I prefer to have the things flow as long as they can, but this has been a tradition that maybe we need to revisit because not all traditions are worth keeping.
Yeah, that's just what I'm suggesting. The group should ponder this a little bit and seeing whether we're fighting nature, fighting the ecology of our group. It's proving to be a difficult matter, and it might be the first obvious thing is to shorten that break. And people, I'm sure, are taking breaks when they want to. Those that maybe aren't pictured here. I'm willing to make a start here with a couple of thoughts, maybe shedding a little light and a lot of darkness on this matter. And I'm probably atypical of the special interest group that we call Roy Branson Legacy Fellowship. I want to say a very big yes to the healing approach. When I was a farmer of 3,000 acres, I was brought up to believe, and I do still believe, an approach of animal husbandry, the husband of the earth. I use that expression. And now there's creation care and there's other more trendy, which are very, very useful. But it comes from the individual's training. It comes from their heart. It comes from their sensitivities. And a lot of what we see that we don't like is a result of human insensitivity. I really do believe this topic is a matter of individuals. That's where we'll see movement in small groups. My expectation that the church body, the leadership, will not shift on their traditional positions. I think it's wrong even to expect them to, other than in an incremental manner. And it's not that they aren't concerned. It's that they have a different focus and they have a different charge. They have a different mission. And goodness me, the church is trying to maintain its very existence, its very core theology. That's what it's struggling with. And so I would suggest that unless it was very well organized with a strong base of support, the church should not enter into this discussion, at least at this time. Some preparation has to be done, and certainly some financial preparation, but the whole mindset needs to change. And one might even argue that a certain generation has to pass away because they're not changeable and they're not going to change. Change will come slowly. These are the facts, what we are, that we are looking at. I think earlier you mentioned funding, and I know that Bob and others here know that my background is in public health policy analysis as well. So I have a strong interest in this, but I'm much more tied to economics and financial management. And so therefore I'm one of those people going to look at it through those eyes and not necessarily a social welfare, social care model at all. But funding is definitely an issue, and funding does reflect the focus and always will. And the focus has to do with also with the authenticity of the primary problem. What is the primary problem? Money. When you hire short-term politicians and policymakers, they will vote for, and their power lays with where money needs to be spent for them to stay in power. And it's a very power-oriented game. It also has to do with the fixability. If you talk grandiose about fixing the earth here and the earth's problem is it lacks focus. You know, people don't know how to move forward with it. You have to design programs that are fixable within the investment lifetime of the people, and in particular the voter. But unfortunately, you've got the added problem of some poor quality research on this matter. And a lot of scientists don't agree, and they're very suspicious of each other's science because of the funding background, where the money comes from and who's paying and how dependent upon they are on continuing research and not losing their grants, and therefore, you know, in some ways fiddling the data. You've got that is prolific in this topic of earth care and global warming. But, you know, when it comes to population control, just a brief word there because it came up, there are a couple of places in the world that monitor this very closely. And the way that I'm reading it is it's really all about Africa, and Bob might make a comment on this, but Africa itself is slowly changing. And by the end of this century, and it might sound a long way away, but I believe that Africa will normalize. And you talk to African leaders, but talk to the people. They've got to stop having so many babies, as Donna might say. But on the other hand, it is the rest of the world is already addressing population control. And there's many countries, and many European countries, but also Japan and China, and China's changing its policies, is they're losing people. They're losing their population. You know, so population, what people are saying today, I think, about population, overpopulation, really needs to be revisited. And some of those old sayings for 10, 20 years or a decade need to be put aside and updated. But population expansion to the point of ending the world is, frankly, is nonsense, the way that I read it. And
Yeah, Rodney.
let's go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have touched a little bit too many subjects, and it's
Okay.
difficult. It's going to be difficult for Bob to address all of them. But before Bob goes there, just a quick question: you do not think that care for the earth is a theological issue?
In the vein of Constead and caring, I think it is. But at an organizational level, I think it's naive to think there's going to be an organizational shift. I come from a large number of big families of primary producers. They will not buy in at all. None of them will buy in at all to the global caring advocacy, because they don't believe that it's run by people that are in any way in touch with the earth and what they see. And so, but they're very, very sensitive to issues of livestock care, of water care, and many other observable, manageable issues that are within their purview on their farms. Very, very interested, not necessarily on a global issue. Now, I'll just end with one comment, because I don't want to stay on this too long. But there's this issue of verification, and that's why I think often we're a special interest group is. I have just recently done tours of Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. I'm the only person in the bus that repeated any question about global warming and the implications of global warming and earth care. And the answer I got back on both times from 2 different countries is, this is American and European concern. It's not our concern. We are doing very well. In fact, if there's some global warming, it's helping our economy. It's helping us increasing the pasturage, but we will not, and we do not see any kind of earth care problem when it comes to our people and our country. We need to think about that, because that's about how big is the problem that we're discussing when other countries want to push it back on an issue for United Nations, the European Union, and America, and don't accept it. And I could go on to Australia from this point of view, is record animal weights, record rain, record crops, record harvesting. So if you shift the focus away from St. George or some other focus, is other people in other parts of the world are having different stories. And I'm going to finish with one thing since Bob started there with St. George. It's St. George, everything that he mentioned there is measurable. Demand is measurable. The population growth was expected. It was measurable. The consumption of water and agricultural products in that area and food in that area was all measurable. There is no mystery in this. And yet in the meantime, all the water continues to run down to the ocean through the rivers. Plenty of water in the sky, plenty of water in the rivers, and it runs to the ocean. There's conservation of water. And when was the last time that any government in the Western region built a reservoir or did spend any money in that area? So the issue to me, it's about who you're voting for, who's elected into politics. And yes, there is a problem with Adventists not wanting to see Adventists filling political interests and standing for offices. I see that as being a problem. But to finish it with here is, it's about who's got the power and why many Adventists will tout their keen concern in global issues that have to do with global sensitivity and weather sensitivity, and still vote for the same politicians who won't spend on this issue. It's not even on their top 10 issues. Just astounds me. I think there's a lot. I'm going to finish with, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy within Adventists.
Thank you, Rodney. I think Bob got a lot to respond to here. So
it's not the first time Bob's heard from me on this topic, but
no.
The discussion went on while in the wait time. Then I got loaded up in that way.
Sure. So
And
let's give a
too.
hand to chance to Bob to respond to some of these things, and then we can go back to McKinley and Julie.
Well, it's hard to respond to all of that, but a lot of it, I agree with you. I can remember when I worked in Rwanda, the president of the college where we started, he used to have this little saying that I think kind of summarizes what you're saying there, Rod. He said, when someone says it's not about the money, it's about the money.
Yes. Yes, so true. We know that.
It's absolutely true. And I think a lot of these issues are complex, scientifically, economically, socially. They go from global to local. And you've painted a picture. I've heard this so many times. You're absolutely right. And a lot of it is about helping our church members and average citizens to become more educated about what the issues are and getting better civic involvement in these issues and so on. And I by no means have all of the answers, maybe not even some of the answers. So thank you so much, Rod, for raising that. And I'd like to hear what some of the others have to say, whether it's about the local church or whether it's a conference level or a general conference level. There are things that could be said at that level. When it comes, now you mentioned overseas, absolutely true that if you work like I have in Honduras and Costa Rica, I just came back a month ago from El Salvador, and then next week I'm going to talk about my experience in El Salvador. El Salvador is the most densely settled country in all of Central America, if not all of the Western Hemisphere, facing some real problems, real issues. My parents helped to start a vocational school there 40 years ago, and I was back there a month ago for the anniversary. Andrews University, several other churches are helping to turn what used to be the boarding school into a college. And it is out in the country. We'll talk about that next week. But to me, that was an example of something that can be done. The school is focused on helping kids that are caught in gangs in the cities to get out into the countryside where they can learn trades, they can get away from all the oppression and problems they have. So there are things we can do. Whether these are things that only should be done at an individual or community level is, I think, a big issue. In El Salvador, just a little preview for next week, the union president there has become very involved with having the church members and the pastors work with their local small churches, dealing with some of these issues of gangs, of family breakup, of environmental degradation. It's really quite really encouraging that, in some countries of Latin America, I've seen some very good things happening. Same with Africa, not everywhere, but, and maybe that's just the way it is, as you say, Rod. It's going to be individual, it's going to be regional, it's going to, there's multiple aspects, education, institutional, how we vote, all of that's important. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Simone. Yeah.
Back to
Thank
you,
you.
McKinley.
Thank you very much, Bob and Rodney, for that exchange. I want to restart the conversation that Julie's question initiated and maybe build on that. But I think Julie's question and experience about a possible sustainability initiative encapsulates the questions and issues that Bob's presentation to us this morning covered. And the intriguing thing is that Julie asked the question, what could she do to motivate interest and a better response to participation in a sustainability initiative in her institutional environment. And the question draws together three things that we talked about in Bob's presentation. And he asked, does the Adventist message of health extend to the health of the ecology and environment? And then I build on that to ask, how do these relate to the vision of healing that Dr. Tongstad's rereading of Revelation presents? And linked that to the Sabbath documentary that Simona shared during the week. And the question is, could Julie's initiative at Loma Linda pull together those three areas, and perhaps could that be a way to invite a better response or a different response to her sustainability initiative? And so, Julie, what do you think? By linking those three things together, do you think it might be possible to generate a different response to your sustainability initiative or interest?
Well, I hope so. And I do still feel optimistic. As I mentioned, Sigva is on our sustainability group and has good input. I think the current thing that I mentioned during the break is that Sigva has been communicating with and has invited to our campus Timothy Pacharat, who is the author of Every 12 Seconds, Industrialized Slaughter and the Politics of Sight. And we thought this could be a really important discussion to have on our campus to engage our students and our faculty and our administration to think about what eating meat means in terms of animal suffering. It's sort of a different angle on the issue than Adventists usually engage in, but I think it's an important angle. And I'd love to have everybody's feedback on whether they think they'd like to support that kind of event on campus. It's maybe going to happen next October, November-ish, if we can get the we have the financial support for it in place, but we need the administrative support to make it happen.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, I might ask Julie a question. You're in the medical school, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Would the issue of use of animals in experimentation, you know, in research, could that also come up? I know that when I was in the School of Public Health many years ago, we had discussions about that. And I think Loma Linda has also changed some of its policies regard about animal rights and care when it comes. So do you want to share anything? Is there something that could be learned that way in terms of how we influence the research that Loma Linda does that could encourage and transcend some of these issues?
That's an angle that I think should be pursued that I haven't really engaged with yet. I'm a biological researcher. We have used mice in our research. It's very carefully controlled, right? You have to treat them better than you treat people in many ways. So yeah, it's an important conversation to have. Loma Linda, I don't think is using any primates in research for the last few years. It's been surprisingly recently that we still had primates. But I think it's definitely an important conversation to have. So we should be talking about that.
Thank you.
So Bob, I wanted, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, McKinley. Now, Julie, you were, I think I cut you off, let you astray. You were talking a little bit about the meat. You were saying that your group is trying to develop a conference or a meeting. Could you explain that a little bit more? It sounds interesting.
Sure, yes. So Sigve Tonstedt, I'm sure you've been here and heard his presentations, but he's been emailing back and forth with Timothy Pascherat for quite a while, and it finally came to the point that Sigve felt comfortable asking him to come and give a presentation on our campus. So I can provide, you know, some links if you're interested in knowing what Timothy Pascherat's work has been about. But the subject would be, as I've said, to consider what eating meat means in terms of animal suffering. The title of the book is Every 12 Seconds. I think that says a lot about how many animals die in just in this country for our diets.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and that's very good. Thank you. And McKinley, back to you. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Again, Julie, thank you for your question, because I think it really triggered some tying together of some concepts here. But back to Bob, and I wonder if Ed can comment on this idea as well. So we've had this classical set of, okay, I see your hand, Simona. We've had this classical set of doctrinal precepts we present in the Adventist message. One that focuses on the Sabbath, rightly so, and creation, rightly so, but in a way that emphasizes the spiritual aspects of the Sabbath. And from that PBS documentary, Bob, it seems that there are some environmental earth care aspects of Sabbath rest. And I wonder if there is a way that some of the messaging about the Sabbath could emphasize or include elements of environmental response that would attract a broader audience.
Oh, no, I agree with you completely. You know, one of the things, the book that I talked about, Beyond Stewardship, it raised a concept that to me, I think was important. And this, I think, where the Sabbath can fit into this. And it's trying to suggest that how we humans relate to nature, both other humans and the non-human world and the physical world broadly, that we should look at it as not a, and that's why he doesn't like the word steward. He thinks the word steward talks more about money and money management and overseers, people that control things and so on. But we should look at our relationship as reconciliation, restoration. And I think that's the message that Sig Konstad's talking about. That's what the book of Revelation's about. Are we involved in helping to reconcile humans with nature, humans with non-human species, and get a better sense of our place in nature? And maybe if that was better understood, we'd get people more involved in voting and doing the other kinds of practical things that are needed. So maybe we need a new word. That's why I think stewardship sometimes just gets, it sounds more like, well, that's my money manager face. But it's more than just money management. Does that help in getting us talking?
I think it does. And I think you're stimulating a lot of thought around this issue, and it will continue the conversation. Let me invite Simona to ask a question, and we can continue building on this. But I really like this idea of tying these three things together: the concept of Sabbath rest, the traditional health message, expanding the scope to the ecology, and then tying that into Sigva's rereading of Revelation's vision of healing. Simona.
I would like to maybe add another dimension to this. So sometimes we look at the effect that we have on the environment, but we fail to look at how the environment affects us. And there was a very interesting study that I shared with David this week that looked at the effect of all these climate change issues that are happening, particularly, large weather events like hurricanes and things like that, how they affect human brain. And there were some striking findings on the way how such events, which are increasing in number and severity due to climate change and our activity, how it affects human brain and how chemistry of the human brain. So that's that's just one of the things. The other thing is, I'm just kind of adding to what Julie added, was talking about how we treat animals. And so I don't know how many of you have seen, it's an old movie called K-Pax with Kevin Spacey, I think. And it speaks of a man who worked in a factory where he was killing cows and how it affected his mental state. It is a much broader, it addresses some other broader issues, but that is kind of the premise, where he starts from, that, he just couldn't keep killing anymore because it affected him in such a way. And in a way, in old times, people had their own cow that they knew by name. And if they at some point decided to kill it, it was a sacrifice for them as well. But now we have this industrial scale killing that is remote for people who are eating meat. They are not the ones who have to do it, but somebody is bearing that weight on their behalf, on our behalf, or, speaking as a humanity at large. And I think that we need to start addressing some of these issues. How are we being affected by our actions and inactions in terms of, our psychological health and communal health?
You're absolutely right there. That really means a lot. And thank you for raising that, because, and I see this just down the road from me, and maybe a little personal story. Some of the largest feedlots in the country are just about an hour's drive from me in the southwestern corner of Utah. Huge feedlots, industrial type of agriculture. They feed the animals with hay and other things that are using up vast amounts of water. Groundwater is depleting to feed these cattle, and then they load them right on the railroad because the railroad's right there, and they go straight down to LA. And then there, and so this whole industrial machine is truly hidden. I mean, unless you know it's there and actually know the whole process, we are definitely insulated from the effects of how we behave as consumers. And I guess it gets back again to the whole issue of education. How do we help people to understand where their food comes from? Who has to raise it? What are the impacts of it? By the way, I don't sell any of my hay to those feedlots. My hay goes to a local lady who raises horses, but these are horses that have been, what shall we say, abandoned, okay? And so I'm doing my little part with my hay as a farmer to avoid that feedlot frenzy.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Simona. David Vegland.
Yeah, I just weigh in briefly this discussion about the treatment of animals and even the impact of that upon humans. You probably everyone's aware, but if you're not, a good starting point for understanding this is to go back to Upton Sinclair's book entitled The Jungle from 1906.
Right.
And it tells of the devastating impact on not only animals, but humans in slaughterhouses and packing plants. And so, I recommend that, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle from early in the last century.
Absolutely, and things haven't gotten any better. Yeah.
Thank you. And again, what I'm picking up from our little exchange here, and for those of you who have not asked a question, please feel free to raise your hand. It's how I see core elements of our Adventist thinking pooling to form a solution to some of these ecological things. You just talked about the treatment of animals. That brings in the vegetarian lifestyle that ties into our broader healthy lifestyle that has found communities like Loma into the blue zone category. But I'm also just really, really fascinated about this extended notion of the Sabbath that Adventists take for granted, but much of the world still needs to discover beyond the spiritual blessings that we tend to emphasize. Now, Sabbath, as we have experienced it, is an opportunity for families to connect and friends to connect and associate. These connections address what I now understand is a really, really big health crisis in America, the crisis of loneliness.
Right.
I understand that about 50% of American adults are lonely. And I wonder if the fellowship environment, the communal environment and experience that Sabbath brings could be one way of the broader society addressing some of these loneliness issues. If Sabbath rest is a way to respond to the environmental and ecological concerns by limiting some of the activities as that documentary talked about. Bob, that's a question to you.
Sure. No, I think that's important. But to me, what the most important part of that, if you study the research on blue zones and things like that, it's not so much the rest per se. That is important. I think the medical people can tell us about that and the epidemiologists. But even more important is they're finding out the importance of human connection. And if you take time out, whether it's to connect with family, to connect with friends, to connect to other people, that is, they have found that maybe has even more importance than just exactly what you're eating or not eating and the water and things like that. And of course, the issues of mental health, particularly among the youth of today, is amazing. And then we could get into, you know, a lot of our young people are addicted to social media, and they don't have a lot of connectivity directly face to face with other friends or other kids. And so, no, you're absolutely touching on an important issue: connection, relationship, restoration. Back to I think what the book was talking about: restoration and reconciling people with people and with each other is going to have to be part of this. And how do we organize it is the question.
Thank you. Rodney, I see you before I bring you in. Every time we start a Branson Sabbath School class, one never knows how the class is going to unfold and what deep thoughts and sharing might ensue. And I'm just fascinated again by the way this conversation is tying together these 4 or 5 elements that might appear to be silo elements, but when you bring them all together, they have some very, very profound implications. Rodney. Rodney, are you there? Okay, there you go.
Bob and Julie, the things that we're talking about, I would like to hear some testimony, if there is anybody remaining on this program, from the School of Public Health. These are very relevant, germane School of Public Health issues. That's the vehicle I would look for them to come forward with and to be picked up with. And so, Julie, on your committee, do you have a School of Public Health people, or are you somewhere else positioned?
Yeah, there are several from public health, and a couple of them, well, at least one I can think of is often in this class.
Are they researching, picking this up as a departmental issue, or is this just the individual human interest?
Oh, you may be familiar with Joan Sabate's work on, let's see if I can describe it accurately, on the environmental impact of a vegetarian diet.
Yes, in fact, Bob, you might remember, it goes back maybe a couple of years ago, and you did some presentations and we talked about these issues at length. So some of the things that I'm hearing here, and it's not that they shouldn't be discussed, because this was before Simona's time and probably before your time, McKinley. But at their core, the whole concept of regeneration, of reconciliation, of recovery, of recreation, all those things, in my mind, all go together very nicely in an expanded, and I hate to use the word even reinterpretation, because it should have always been that way, of how we keep the Sabbath and how we talk about the Sabbath. So I see a high degree of coherency in these subject matters. I get somewhat frustrated with diversion and maybe some discussion that sometimes is not focused, and there's nothing in front of us that we can get hold of and get started with. I think that's one of the real challenge on these issues that we talk globally about. Got to be able to grab it somewhere and make a start. And that's why a lot of them, I think, don't go anywhere. But in terms of concept, I'm very much, so you don't misunderstand me, I'm very much in support of that enlarged and really a reinvigoration of how we interpret the Sabbath into a lifestyle, into coherent messages, and away from strict observant laws that are based on ancient doctrines that are interpretable, quite frankly.
You know, you're absolutely right. Can I maybe just turn the discussion a little bit to another way? It's another aspect of Adventism I talked on briefly, but the book that I was talking about talked a lot about the fact that we don't talk enough about how these ideas affect people that live in urban versus rural environments. I know that we have a long history in the Adventist Church about talking about, and the cities are terrible and they're going to get worse, and we should flee to the countryside and live isolated lives and healthy lives and so on. And so there's, now I haven't heard this discussion for several years, but how do we take some of those ideas that have been, and sometimes from Ellen G. White, about what's terrible about cities. But if we're truly going to be reaching out and be healing, we've got to figure out better ways to deal with people that are caught up in the problems of cities. Even today, I suspect that many more Adventists live in suburbs or rural areas than they do in the truly dangerous inner city environments. And do we have a message for urban environments? And how do we bring healing to places like that? I want to talk more about that next week. When we talk about El Salvador, because their big problem with the youth was, how do we help kids that are caught up in gangs in the cities and in the ghettos? And the solution there was, well, we'll take them out of the city and we'll take them to this beautiful little Adventist campus out in the middle of sugarcane fields, and we'll get them away. And that's fine. But what about the poor kids that still have to live in the city? Okay, what are we doing for them? Just a question to raise.
Yeah. Simona, if I could just add 30 seconds to my comment there. In the previous forum where this subject matter came around a couple of years ago, I gave a brief and somewhat amped up testimony of how the cost on my psyche for being an animal killer. I was appointed the family butcher at 11 years old. And I had and we were meat eaters, a very heavy meat eating family. But once I got retired and became more reflective, the thing that would stop me in my tracks or want me to even pull over in my motorhome on the side was the memory of an animal that I was in the process of killing or that I had harmed in some way, such as sheep shearing. I put a deep cut in it, or worse, I had hamstrung its rear leg, so it had to be killed because I had gone straight through the hamstring. And I won't go on with the graphic pictures. It's my belief that humans were not meant to be killers.
Right.
Our psyche is not prepared and built to be killers. And here I was coming back in my aged years, predominantly having nightmares about the action of killing or wounding an animal. I never really saw it coming, but I have my own little journey here that is a private journey. And as of a couple of years ago, I became a vegetarian. As of the 1st of this year, I became a vegan. And so I'm very supportive of individual people being reflective and making this journey and down in small groups. I'm not pessimistic. I'm not optimistic, as I said, about a broader church-based response in this situation. But I want you to understand that personally, what we've talked about is something that I thought a lot about and read about personally over the last couple of years.
Thank you very much, Rod. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Rodney. Simona, I see you. And then, Juan was just, he still is here. So Juan, is it Juan? Your name was mentioned about your work on the environmental impact of a vegetarian diet. And I wonder, after Simona speaks, whether you might share a thought or two about that work, if you have any kind of an update, because it relates to the conversation we're having. Simona.
Thank you. So there are two issues that I've been thinking about as we had this discussion. One is that, we talk about the Sabbath for us, but what about the Sabbath for the environment? Because that was built into the laws as well. Every 7th year, they did not collect the crops so that, the crops could feed the ground. And those who were poor, for example, so do not collect everything, right? So it was both for the humans and the environment. And then every 50th year, there was another Sabbath year for the soil, right? For the environment. There was Sabbath for the animals. It wasn't just humans who weren't supposed to work. Also
and for
animals.
The slaves.
Yes, and anybody who was within their doors, right? So it is a very, I think, much more encompassing thing than we usually address. And I think the Sabbath for the earth, the Sabbath for the animals is also very important. And that's one thing that we probably should be addressing in practical ways. And then the second question that I haven't, it's been really weighing on my mind for some time now. How do we do the reconciliation if we are not reconciled within ourselves? You know, we have such deep divisions in our church. And I sometimes wonder, are we truly reconciled? Are we truly members of one body? Are we truly brothers and sisters the way how we treat each other? And I would like to see more and better reconciliation, particularly for those who are marginalized in our communities or even excluded, because that is actually our mission. Our mission is to be inclusive. Our mission is to love. It doesn't say love except those who are this and this. It just says love. And so I think that we have to reconsider where we stand on some of the issues that we claim to hold dear.
Well said, Simona.
Bob,
Well
you want to
said.
respond?
Oh, no, it's absolutely, you're right on. That's, you talked earlier about the loneliness issue, about mental health issue. It really is about restoration, reconciliation. And if we don't have that, we don't have anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Juan, are you there? Would you like to comment? Julie, I sent you a message in the chat. So, anybody else? Then before I turn it back over to Simona for our closing. This has been, I think, a fun and insightful exchange. Bob, thank you. Julie, again, thank you very much for sharing your experience. Your hand is raised, so go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, I did text John Sabate and ask him to join, and it looks like he did. And just to be fair to him, since he didn't hear the conversation and the discussion, Joanne, we have been talking about how can I summarize it? But how we can combine the revelation of healing that we've been seeing in Sigva's presentation in taking care of the environment and the Sabbath, right? So I was reminded of your work about how a vegetarian diet contributes to taking care of our environment. And I just wondered if you would share a few words about that.
Ron, if you are trying to unmute yourself, I think it's *6 on the phone.
Yeah, Joanne might not be connected on. I see him, but here he is.
Hello.
There we go.
Okay, thanks. I heard the *6. Okay. Well, thanks for this invitation from Julie to say a few things about the vegetarian diet. But I want before to say, Bob, I'm sorry I missed your presentation. I hope it's going to be recorded or has been recorded. I had several things going on today and I couldn't attend this Sabbath school that I would have loved to participate. But thanks to Julie, I'm now connected. I hear the message, sorry, the last intervention that Simona did, which I couldn't agree more. I mean, sometimes we have a restricted vision of the Sabbath, and it applies for us. And we say that the Sabbath was done for us and not was for the Sabbath. Mean that there is just for the human race or for the humans. The Sabbath is for the animals, is for the earth, and it's for everybody. And by keeping the Sabbath not every week, but every 7 years and every 50 years, I mean, it's a reset. To me, the Sabbath is to press the button reset, and many things have to be reset. Okay, after that, so go specifically to the role of the diet. I think the diet, particularly vegetarian, I mean, is a way that we can contribute to the sustainability and that we can do that in a direct way. It is true that in societies like most of us live, in which we are far removed from the production of the foods, and that we go to the supermarket and we buy whatever we need, and then we consume that, or we go to a restaurant. There is a dramatic difference between the animal products, and particularly the red meat that comes from the ruminants, as far as not only the greenhouse gas emissions, but also the amount of land that is needed and water, so on and so forth. But besides the issue of meat specifically, I think there are other components of the diet that also contribute to the sustainability, and is the issue that goes into proximity versus far away, the issue of already prepared versus do that from scratch, so on and so forth. In other words, soy meat analogs are much more sustainable than real meat. However, this dramatic difference gets reduced when you add the packaging. So, but that does apply only to this, but applies to any other highly prepared food that needs to be packaged. So the packaging, the proximity, and definitely the one that now is pushing a lot in the media is the leftovers. I mean, the idea that you eat for breakfast what you forgot to eat for dinner, or that you repeat the things until are finished, is not commonly done. And now we have much food leftovers that is really wasted. Anyway, that's very quickly what I could say about our contribution of diet to the environment.
Thank you very much, Juan. We appreciate your sharing those thoughts, and it further enriches the exchange that we've had this morning, and adds to Bob's excellent presentation. And again, Julie, thank you very much for sharing your experience, because I think it stimulated further discussion. Simona, back to you.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Bob, for this interesting subject. And I think we are going to have another very interesting discussion next week. And as usual, I would like to end our official part of the meeting with some thoughts. I think sometimes the First Nations had probably a little bit better relationship to the environment than we do. And I often remember some of the words that they have said. I'm going to read just two of them. One is the Cree Indian prophecy that says, "Only when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish had been caught, and the last stream poisoned, will we realize we cannot eat money." And the second is from Chief Seattle. "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect." And I think this understanding that we are a part of a much larger web of life, where all our actions and inactions affect people and world around us, is something that we should continue thinking about and bringing forward. And our blessing for this week also comes from the First Nations. "May the stars carry your sadness away. May the flowers fill your heart with beauty. May hope forever wipe away your tears. And above all, may silence make you strong." This is it for this week. We'll see you next week. Thank you, and have a good Sabbath and productive week ahead.
Thank you. And McKinley, just in case you're not looking at the chat, I did share an email there.